Let's go.
Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast, where we expand your personal universe. I'm Diana Marquetta, and in each episode, Soul Fam co-founder, co-creator Lexi Strummer-Solden and I interview the world's most rising and longtime experts in consciousness, spirituality, entertainment, healing, and science. From Earth's dimensions and dimensions way, way beyond. On the Soul Fam podcast, our frequencies are high and your heart chakras will open as these powerful voices of today share cutting-edge research, profound experiences, and valuable knowledge for your world in this out-of-this-world, thought-provoking, envelope-pushing interviews that could only take place right here on the Soul Fam podcast. Welcome to the Soul Fam podcast today with Diana and Lexi. We are honored and very excited to have A.M. Penn from the 10th House Sun on today's interview. And we asked Anne, who's very busy right now teaching astrological school and a couple of other things, to interrupt her very busy schedule and talk with us right now because we felt very strongly that astrologically speaking, and within kind of the context of what's happening on the planet right now, perhaps there might be a tie between the two that will help us all understand things a little bit better. So thanks for joining us today. Can you kind of bring a little light to what's going on? Enlighten us a little bit about what's going on right now, sort of with Pluto returns and maybe with some other astrological aspects that are really having an impact on what we as human beings are doing now.
Yeah. Well, let me just start by doing a little explanation of Pluto. So Pluto is the planet of revolutionary transformational change. So it's not just like a snake sheds a skin, that is part of it, but it's more like the caterpillar going into the cocoon and emerging as a butterfly. So it's a complete transformation. So we lose our legs, we have to spend some time in the cocoon, we have to break ourselves out of the cocoon with our own wings, no one else can do it for us, or otherwise it harms the process, and then we become a completely different thing. So this Pluto makes change in a very slow process. So a big part of what most folks have probably been hearing about is that it is the Pluto return of the United States. It was earlier this year. So I think folks did a lot of speculating about what kind of caterpillar we would be turning into as a country. And, I don't know that that has fully borne itself out yet. We may still be experiencing some of the cocoon time, but I think we just need to be prepared for things to look differently, for us to be able to move into an entirely new way of being, which may be uncharted territory for us. So a big part of what we think of with Pluto as well is that it's our shadow side. And we think of the sun as our solar light side, right? And one of the issues here is that when we think of this type of duality of sun and shadow, neither one of them are bad. We want to welcome all the parts of ourselves, all the parts of astrology, all the planets, astrological planets, to have a seat at the table of our lives and to work from a space of wholeness. So the power of astrology really is getting to know ourselves, number one, so that each one of us can make a more skillful collective. So astrology works on both of those levels. So what I would tell people is never underestimate the power of transforming yourself and the power that that brings to transforming the collective. Because it only takes a small group of people to make revolutionary, radical breakthrough change. A tangible example, if we think of the slavery in this country, a small group of abolitionists who didn't care about money, who cared more about human life than material resources and participating in an unjust system, were able to evolve this entire country. And they did it because it just took one person with enough power to be able to do it, which we can think of as Abraham Lincoln. So the fact that we evolve ourselves holds space for entire movements that will eventually create the leader that will be able to evolve the whole country. So things like prayer, all of the spiritual tools that we have in our toolbox, these are not nothing. And they eventually do make revolutionary breakthrough change. Astrologically, we look to Pluto as a planet that is a marker of that. We also look to Uranus, which we can talk about as well. For me, I'm a little bit less interested in sort of the Pluto transits of this year. Pluto spends about half its time, a little less than half its time in retrograde. So I don't look at it as when it shifts to station retrograde or station direct. I don't look at it as that unusual, right? Because it's always kind of making that path. And when we think about that path of spending half its time forward, half its time backwards, that's sort of that like drilling down into creating something new that is needed to make change, right? It doesn't happen in a snap or in a heartbeat. So the slow moving kind of concept is kind of a slow burn. And tarot readers will know that we associate Pluto with the element of fire. So that's why I use that word burn. And alchemically, we speak of fire as being a purifying element. So this is what we're experiencing with Pluto. I'll say the time that I'm really looking forward to in terms of Plutonic transits is February of 2024. The sun's going to pass Pluto. All of the personal planets are going to interact with Pluto. And then we're going to go into eclipse season in March. So I feel like that's going to be a very telling time. Where we currently are, we did just have, the nation had its Pluto return, and then we just experienced our first in an eclipse cycle. And Pluto then stationed direct. And so we're going to be learning the last phase of that transit of Pluto stationing direct up until February of 2024, because retrogrades work with a first pass, a backwards pass by our perception here on Earth, and then another forward path. So the curriculum, the lessons of a retrograde happen in 3 parts. So we've only had the first 2 parts. So we're on the last leg of our Pluto lesson for this time around. And then we'll be having the next eclipse,
which is when? Soon. Is it next weekend?
Good question. Yeah, the next eclipse is going to be a Taurus eclipse, and it's happening on October 28th. So it's a partial lunar eclipse, and it's the last of almost a 2-year eclipse cycle in varying signs, but predominantly in Taurus and Scorpio. So we'll really be getting sort of a wrap up to like a 2-year lesson. And, I think a lot of folks can kind of see how that maybe landed in their lives. So for me, for example, I finished up a portion of the grad school program that I'm in. So I would just really encourage people to kind of see where the resets are in their lives, and to understand that, perhaps that has something to do with the activations of this Scorpio Taurus eclipse cycle. And right now, we're working now and then in the future with Libra eclipses, which are south node eclipses. And that's a little bit more challenging because it's putting us into a zeitgeist of Libra energy, which is peace and harmony and balance. But it's with the south node, which is a comfort zone area that we're actually looking to evolve out of. And so we're going to be moving into some Aries energy in the spring of next year. And we're going to start to see the emergence of rugged individualists who aren't afraid to butt heads, who do want to create a space for the individual um, to emerge over the collective needs. Um, but I think, that with eclipses, they alternate back and forth between these energies. And I think of it like a lasagna, like laying layers of this meal, right? So we need all of the energies, and it's actually beneficial to oscillate between polarities, because that's what helps to get us to a more centered space. So what I would encourage folks right now is to understand that wherever we are in our positionality, number one, orientation to a situation matters. The way that I see something may not be the way that somebody else sees something or experiences something. A tangible example, I was holding a crystal and I said, "Oh my gosh, this crystal is so hot." And I handed it to my mom and she goes, "What do you mean? This crystal is freezing cold." And then when I grabbed her hand was much warmer than mine, right? So there was a difference in temperature of our own individual orientations. The stone did not change, but our individual perspective was what was bringing our experience of that stone, right? And so this is with all situations in the world, in our lives, we can start to think about our own personal orientations. What is my orientation to this situation? The second something exists, the opposite is also immediately created. So then we say, okay, I am oriented here. What would be the opposite of that orientation? Now, what would be the spectrum of every shade in between those two orientations? Right? So then we say, okay, well, that's the full possibility of this spectrum. What would another spectrum look like? For example, I'm on the spectrum of war. What would the spectrum of peace look like? Right? What would the spectrum of something else look like? So this is how we start to get understandings of our own orientation, of other people's orientations, of every opportunity in between, and then what are our other options? Because if we want something different, we have to do something different. We can't keep staying on the same spectrum forever and expect things to get better, right? So if we are thinking outside of the box, and this is what a lot of this Aquarius energy is going to bring to us. So we've had Pluto in Capricorn, and it revolutionized our financial systems. We had the 2008 real estate bubble burst, right? And the whole thing started to crumble. So as Pluto begins to move into Aquarius, we're going to really start looking at these issues of the collective, and it's a very future-focused type of energy. So it's going to force us to move into a state of being that is good for the collective, but it may feel weird. I'm kind of hoping that our discoveries surrounding aliens force us to unify as like a human species. That's the type of weird that I'm talking about in terms of Aquarian energy.
Say that again. Say that again. You're hoping that the aliens' presence...
I'm hoping that we learn something from life in other places that forces us to stop looking at humans as our enemies and rather says, "Oh, okay, well, I'm from planet Earth and this life force is from another planet." So now we can start. That's the type of spectrum that I'm talking about. We're currently on this earthly spectrum, but what if there's more spectrums that we haven't even realized yet or discovered yet? And hopefully that will be a peaceful relationship too. But that's the type of things that could happen in Aquarius, right?
Yes.
So there's just a lot of change in the works. This is a big deal with Pluto ingressing Aquarius. It won't fully be completely in that sign until November of 2024. So that is definitely something for us to be aware of as well. It's not quite here yet.
Speaking to seeing the opposites of things or understanding the spectrum that's possible or that actually does exist. I mean, if we have war, it's the dark and the light. So if we have war, we have peace. I mean, that actually exists somewhere. So within the context of this dimension. So what happens with Uranus moving at the same time? Am I right about that? I don't know about that. You guys are the experts. I'm just following along.
Yeah. Uranus is currently in the sign of Taurus, and it doesn't really love being in Taurus because Uranus is the planet of revolutionary breakthrough change, and it is the highest octave of mental energy. So it's God's mind is the way that I frame it, for lack of a better word, but it's how the divine mind functions, not how the mind of people on Earth function. And so when something is in alignment with God's mind, it feels like revolutionary genius breakthrough. When something is out of alignment with God's mind, it feels like complete destruction, catastrophe, like a bomb going off. So Taurus doesn't love this, right? Because it wants to create very stabilized Earth energy from which to build from. And it does have these very sort of peaceful qualities to it. And so the planet that is trying to like blow things up and create change is in the most like fixed Earth space possible. So that ability to create change has been a little bit hindered for the planet. But for Taurus and folks with any sort of Taurus energy in their charts, they've been getting a little bit of shock treatment. So they've been making like major life decisions and changes that they probably would never have even thought of, like moving or, things of that nature that are not really in alignment with sustaining Earth energy. So, I think, that's just one thing for us to be aware of in terms of Uranus and Taurus. And Uranus does a very interesting movement in terms of how it makes change. It will go into a new sign and then go back into the sign from which it just came. And it's sort of this 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's how the process of continuing to make change that lasts, is we have to go a little bit beyond what we think is reasonable, go back to a middle ground, and then we can move forward from that middle place. So we're kind of
so is that forward. Typically how Uranus works? Is that why it feels, it feels like this in daily life? It feels like this kind of overall that you're bouncing forward very quickly. Things are very chaotic. And then you sort of like, either to seek refuge or to get some grounding, you kind of end up being back in the middle ground.
And the Uranian process is slow. It's an outer planet, so it is a slow-moving planet too. It doesn't happen super quickly, but it is very powerful because it's like, being plugged into the electric socket. So wherever it is, it's really electrifying that piece of the zodiac. And then however it's being aspected by other planets, it's electrifying those too. So I would just, the lesson for us in a bigger perspective with Uranus is that when it does ingress the sign, it will go back to the old sign. And just like a tangible example of this that maybe isn't connected to a Uranus transit, but feels Uranian, is when we had like same-sex marriage became legalized. If y'all remember, it like went through, and then at a certain point it was taken away again, and that was so devastating. And then it went through again. So it was one of those things where, like, for whatever reason, society had to take a step back in order for us to make meaningful change to push forward.
So what does it bounce back to now? Does it bounce back to Aries, or go back to Aries? Excuse me.
No, it's continuing to move through Taurus for a little while longer. Yeah. So it's still, those poor Earth signs. And then Pluto's going to be moving into Aquarius. So the fixed signs are really going to start getting some of this powerful outer planet energy. Sorry, fixed signs.
It's exciting. I mean, it doesn't always feel exciting, but when you kind of when you take a step back, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think, it's just calling for us we use the fixed signs in magical practice, for example, because they're so great at sustaining energy. So, with these outer planets in and aspecting fixed signs, hopefully this will be revolutionary change that is more in alignment with the divine mind, with the divine sense of evolution and justice, that it will help us as individuals, as a collective, and people to be able to move forward. Another thing that I would say is that, as an astrologer, I'm a firm believer that we came into material reality to experience material reality. And we each have our own natal chart that is customized curriculum for us. I was listening to some New Age content on the internet, and they were saying, well, why do folks come into Earth? Oh, she was a past life regressionist. And she said, because this is the only place where you can burn the amount of karma that we're able to do on Earth. This place is such a school that there's really no other place like it. And so what it kind of clarified for me is, oh, okay, I want to be here. I want to learn these lessons. I'm going to be triggered by the world. And that is something that, I have a whole way of relating to, which my natal chart tells me. And it's up to me to figure out what is the most skillful way of utilizing the energy that I'm here to work with in relationship to the time that I chose to be here. And so I would say that the coping strategy here is twofold. Number one, get to know yourself really well. Number two, become very unattached from how you think things should be and start being a third-party observer. So rather than immediately reacting, take the time to say, what's the most skillful option here? Do that process of my orientation is here, an opposite orientation would be over here. I have all these choices in between, or what else would be better? What else would be more skillful that's not on the spectrum? And when you start to do those types of processes, it removes you a little bit from a level of certainty and urgency, and I need to have this happen now, and says, okay, I can take my time to be more skillful. And we don't always have that time. Sometimes things are urgent, but when we're dealing with very polarizing things in the world, thinking for ourselves and knowing ourselves becomes really important, because then we can say, I have a bias towards this, and I readily acknowledge that. And we can say, okay, I'm open to other types of nuances. Maybe one side is lumping everything together in a way that is not in alignment with how I see it or how I experience it. And everyone's going to have a different nuanced reception of world events. And so I think the thing is to say, because what power structures want of us is to align ourselves brainlessly with whatever their position is. And traditionally, it has to do with following the money. Who makes the most money in this country? Folks that worship at the altar of Mars, folks that are in the business of war, right? So, and that's the other thing we can say. What is the altar that we are worshiping at? Are we worshiping at the altar of war? Sometimes you have to. Sometimes that is the right thing to do. Sometimes severity is needed, protection is needed, but it is only one altar. It's only one planet in astrology. There's a lot of other ones. So let us start thinking about what would it look like then to worship at the altar of Venus, at peace and harmony. But she has an edge to her too. So, what would that look like instead? The thing is that it's just become such a moneymaker in this space of duality as the lesser malefic Mars, that it's what society gravitates to. So now we have these two sides, that it's in somebody's best interest to be this polarized. So the rest of us have to decide where our orientation to this polarity is, and if there's somewhere else we would rather be entirely.
I'd rather be somewhere else entirely. Because there has to be other options. These cannot be the only solutions. And maybe we're not that advanced, but maybe we are. Or maybe there's some other place in the universe, some other dimension where we don't need to do this, or we don't have to do this anymore. So there's some alternate opportunity here.
Yeah, and I'll say that in our tradition, what we do is we pray for the well-being of all souls. I will tell you, it is the job of the mystic, meaning blending polarities and transcending polarities, transmuting polarities, to be able to break the addiction to the polarized positionality of Earth. It is an addiction. That is what we're seeing in the Devil card of the tarot. That is the major addiction. Is people want a high level of certainty, so that they can create some sort of safety for themselves. But sometimes that backfires, right? So what we often reference is the Kabbalion, which is a book that has 7 hermetic principles of the universe in it. And this is the principle of polarity. It says everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pairs of opposites, like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet, all truths are but half-truths, and all paradoxes may be reconciled. So in terms of hope, all paradoxes may be reconciled, right? We let's start there, and then let's work backwards to figure out how to do it. And when we say all opposites are like in kind but different in degree, that's a spectrum that we're talking about, right? Hot and cold are both temperatures. And there is a place where those two things meet. And like I shared with the example with my mom and the crystal, our personal orientations were giving that experience of those polar opposites. So then we also have the option to change ourselves. Maybe if I put on some mittens or, if she grabs some ice, then we could meet in the middle a little bit more and agree on that stone's temperature.
Interesting. Lexi, did you want to ask about Chiron, the wounded healer?
I do. I always want to ask about Chiron because I think just on the micro and the macro level, just it's going to influence how we react to things. And if it's a hair trigger reaction or if we take our time to think and respond instead of react. So I guess I'm wondering, Anne, if you can talk a little bit about Chiron, how it's important in individual charts and sort of what it's doing more broadly right now.
Sure. Yeah, Chiron is the wounded healer, and it's in our individual charts. I call it the hole in the soul that never fully heals. We can improve the quality of the wounding, of the scarring, but it's always a tender point in our chart. So the first thing to do is for us to just have a lot of compassion for ourselves. It's also very validating to figure out exactly what that Chiron is in our natal chart, because it says, it helps you to say, oh, okay, well, I'm struggling with this, but not without a reason, right? And then when we're sensitive to that Chiron wounding, we can really pick it up in others and start to become powerful assistants in the world to help other people, become coaches and teachers and servants in that way. I think of it a little bit like Yoda. I think of Chiron, the myth, himself as sort of a Yoda figure. He trained all the great Greek heroes in mythology. So it is this ability to be of service from a space of understanding how painful life can be and cultivating some skills that help other people to not have to experience that same type of pain. A Chiron in Aries is going to indicate a wound to the self-sovereignty, to the solar self, authenticity, individuality, this kind of rugged individual spirit that our country was created on. And so, I think Chiron spends more of its time in Aries and Pisces. So it's not unusual for it to be in these two spaces, the end and the start of the zodiac. And I would say that that's what I would spend some time meditating on if you're interested in this subject matter of why is that? What does Pisces and Aries, the end and the beginning, that Ouroboros point, have to do with Chiron and being the wounded healer and this experience here on Earth? I don't know, did I answer that?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to know about that?
I think that answers it. It's interesting because when you look at Pisces, and a lot of us have some kind of Pisces placements, whether it's like a South Node placement, which is what I have. And so I think and correct me if I'm wrong, the South Node placement of Pisces is very much sort of like a giving up the individual self into the collective. It's martyrdom. It's past lives as, being persecuted for your beliefs. It's very much one of victimization and not asserting yourself. So I wasn't sure how I felt about Chiron in Aries, because I was thinking, oh gosh, well, is everybody, are they going to be so aggressive? Am I going to be so aggressive? Because, Aries is very fiery, and they're definitely, very honest about, they say exactly what they think. A lot of them, Diana's an Aries. And so I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's good, because I think so many people on the planet have a tendency to wallow, which I know is sort of one of the more difficult aspects of Pisces. So maybe it's healthy for everybody to get some fire going.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a very good point there, too, in terms of the North Node is in Aries right now. So in February, Chiron is going to meet up with the North Node. So the direction, the trajectory that the world is supposed to be moving into is going to be very wounded in February of next year. We'll really start to see that play out. And what's going to happen is, as we move into Aquarius season next year, the sun's going to pass over Pluto. All of the personal planets are going to end up meeting Pluto and moving beyond Pluto. And then Chiron is going to meet up with and then the North Node is going to back into Chiron. It moves in a backwards motion. And then we're also going to have eclipse season activating right after that. So I think that the first quarter-ish of next year is really going to be telling for us in terms of revolutionary change, of how the world experiences a collective consciousness. How I think we're going to really understand our interconnectivity. I think we're going to understand that maybe this isn't working for anybody. If it's not working for one of us, it's not working for all of us. And so hopefully, that will bring some unification by summer of next year.
That's a hope.
That's my hope. Yeah. And Aquarius is certainly, that time of year is a hopeful time of year. But, I think of Chiron a little bit as, it's a very tragic energy to me, because Chiron was put in the stars as a constellation rather than living life as an immortal and being wounded. So it's just a real pain point, but it can also be an indication of healing.
So it's an indication of healing for our planet, for our countries, for us as individuals, for our cultures and societies.
Yeah, I think in February, when it aspects the North Node, it's just going to be a real wake-up call of like, y'all, you can't keep doing this to each other. So let's call in the ambulance and figure out a new way.
How long is the North Node in Aries? Does it transition to something else in 2024?
The node spends about a year and a half in each of its allocation. I'm sorry, I'm not sure when it switches, but we'll be activating this nodal cycle and eclipses for a while still. Yeah,
quite the North and South Node is another sort of thing that fascinates me, but and I'm trying to understand more. I should say that in a more pragmatic way.
Well, and it's nice to talk about during eclipse season, because it helps us to understand the energies that we're bouncing back and forth in between. So we just had the eclipse in Libra, which is a South Node energy. So we're in this space where we're struggling to create Libra things in the world, right? To bring peace and balance,
diplomacy,
and fairness into existence, because it's really not diplomacy, because it's really not clear what those things are based on orientation. And there's a concept in ancient Egypt, which is Ma'at. So many of your listeners have probably heard of that. And that's universal truth, universal order. So it doesn't matter where the individual is oriented. It's in alignment with something much, much higher. And so when we talk about Ma'at, that is very much always a goal for folks who are looking to live skillfully. And if you look to the Egyptian cosmology, the story of your heart being weighed at the end of your life, it's put with the feather of Ma'at or your heart in either end of the scales in the afterworld. And if your heart is heavier than the feather of universal truth and order, then you're eaten. So living life with a lightness of heart and in alignment with this concept of a much higher ideal of truth is really what, the Egyptians would recommend we all be thinking about now, and the ancient Egyptians.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah. And, I think about that often when folks who are misunderstood in this lifetime, but we're really, peacekeepers or trying to move us into the future in a meaningful way, like Martin Luther King or somebody like that, Sinead O'Connor, same type of thing, calling out injustices and speaking truth and trying to make a meaningful difference in the world. I think, well, they'll be vindicated when their heart is lighter than that feather.
Yeah. And these are ideals too. So when you look, and everybody should look up the 42 ideals of Ma'at. I've done it a few times, and I think I got maybe 7 or 8 down. I was like, yes, me. And then by 9, I was like, oh, whoops. Or, oh yeah, I'm definitely going into that hell where the alligators are. But if you can't honestly embody all 42 in this incarnation, focus on the ones you can embody, which some of them are, I am a being of peace. I respect all altars, things like that everybody can do, even if, we.
I think that's such an important point too, is to just being able to understand that there are things that we can control and things that are not ours to control. And so let's focus on the things that are within our power, within our sphere of influence, are helpful. And then let's do those things and understand that by changing ourselves, we do help to hold space for the collective to change. Yeah, I think, one of the things we were talking about was slipping into despair or lower level energies. And what I would say is, as long as we're looking at this incarnation as one, a lesson for ourselves, as we talked about earlier, but 2, an offering to divinity. And when I say divinity, I mean the spark of divinity in each one of our fellow human beings as well. So we never have to feel like we're like imposter syndrome doesn't need to be a thing if you are living your life as an offering to the divine. So you just show up, you do the best you can, you work on those principles of Ma, and I think that is really sort of one of the ways that we can help to pull ourselves out of that hopelessness and out of that despair is by being in that sort of humble position of being of service. And it takes away a lot of the self-doubt if we just consider this as an offering to something greater than ourselves. Because, it's sort of like if you've ever put an offering on an altar or lit a candle, you're not so worried about the quality of that candle. It's the action of the doing of it, right? And that means something, and that's sacred. And our lives mean something. Our lives are sacred. So let's live in that way, and let's see the divinity in others and honor it in ourselves and in others.
Amen. So it is. That's exactly why we wanted to talk to you, Anne. Because that's what our listeners, I think there's sort of like an aching.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I often think too, and I'm constantly reminded of, it's not wrong to be depressed when you're in a depressing world, right? But we can't spend too much time there. We can acknowledge it and say, okay, I'm depressed because this is a depressing situation. Now, what's in my power to do about it? That would be helpful and skillful in the situation that I find myself in. And you'd be surprised that how that transforms your life eventually if you're just consistent about taking the small steps day to day.
Interesting. Good advice for right now.
Yeah.
So what's going to wind up 2023? I don't even feel like I'm in 2023 anymore. I feel like I'm in 2024. But what's going to wind up 2023 for us?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a good question. I don't know. We're going to have a Mercury Cazimi. So we're going to have a Mercury retrograde in December. So that's something for us all to think about and consider. Mercury is also going to conjunct Mars at the end of the year. So I think the mercurial energy of the world is going to be very activated with these kind of two markers of selfhood. And so, I would be watching that. I'm already out of 2024 and my eyes are fully on February into March. I'm sorry, I'm out of 2023 and into 2024. I don't know that folks I feel like a lot of folks want to tell you how intense everything's going to be, but since the pandemic began, I don't really remember a time when life hasn't been that intense. So it just feels like, there's no point in creating more like intensity and interpretations. We're going to just roll with, what we're going to experience. And for me, I just want to say that astrological transits are something for us to track and to learn from and be prepared for in the future with our lives, but they're not things that we need to feel like we are powerless to, right? Because we came to experience this material reality and to figure out how we can be empowered regardless of what the astrological transit is bringing us. So it's our job to just use these energies in the most skillful way possible and not feel like we're the victims of them. Right? So that would be my recommendation too is, in February, everybody get yourself an ephemerist or some sort of astrological tracking method. Follow your favorite astrologers online. There's so many amazing ones offering free content right now. And try to find the people that are fair and balanced in their delivery of energy. And that would be my recommendation.
This is why you're such an amazing teacher. Yeah, I was just going to ask how people can follow you, Anne, or sign up for future classes or know about how to learn astrology from you.
Oh, gosh. Well, this is really more of just my service, my offering to divinity. So, I'm part of a much larger group. So I'm the teacher of astrology at 22 Teaching School of Hermetic Sciences and Magical Arts. I also have a full-time corporate communicator day job, and I'm also in grad school in a doctoral program. So I'm a little busy. So I try to teach astrology school level 1 at least once a year. We've just got a really great group that's gone through. So I'm going to try to get a level 2 in there probably as well next year. So everybody can keep their eyes open for that at 22teachings.com. But that community is a powerful community, and they're all working with these same concepts and very much in alignment with the same type of energy that I just communicated. So I would recommend folks finding them. That's where you can find me when I do teach things. I'm also on Instagram at 10th_house_sun. Just drop me a DM and tell me that you heard this podcast, and I'd be happy to become friends and connect. I am private because y'all have probably been aware that there's like this rash of spammers, tarot readers trying to solicit money from other people. So, I just am trying to mitigate that as I can. Yeah.
So to close this out, we're curious about Halloween, which is coming up very soon. And, how do we enjoy that holiday? Everybody has their own way of enjoying it right now. Some of us enjoy the pagan aspects. Other people want to dress up and party and go trick or treat or whatever.
Yeah. Well, oh man, that's such a great topic. For folks who do have more of a Celtic or pagan background, I would say, really do connect with that tradition if it resonates with you. And my understanding is that it's a type of New Year. So, maybe think about how you might be starting something fresh in that way. That might be kind of exciting. For the traditional celebration of Halloween as we do it in the United States and largely in pop culture now, dressing up. I think that that's fun in terms of being able to maybe take on a different energy and live in that space for a little while, right? Like playing a character, and that may help to teach you something about yourself, like how is this energy experienced in the world by others? Scorpio season Scorpio is all about creating a vibe, right? It's sustained water, emotional energy. So, allowing yourself to feel into these types of things can be really powerful. I don't do a whole lot of messing with things that would be traditionally considered like mean-spirited energies. So that doesn't really even factor into my way of thinking. I think we are talking about a positionality of wholeness in general. So there are some dark things in there that, we do need to connect with and work through. But I wouldn't purposefully call in anything that is demonic or darker or however you want to frame that, unless you know that you're prepared to manage that energy and bind it or whatever skilled magical practice somebody's capable of doing. We don't do those types of things at 22 Teachings. So, I would say intentionality when working with magical practice is so important. What are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? I really resonate with this time of year in terms of Dia de los Muertos, for who maybe resonate with that holiday. It's really kind of a marker of how the veil between the worlds is thin this time of year. And I think honoring our loved ones who are no longer in material reality is a beautiful thing to do. Creating ofrenda altars can be very special and very connecting with those people that you might miss. But also just to take a moment and to say, well, maybe I can't see them. Maybe they're not physically here with me, but that doesn't mean that my relationship with them needs to discontinue. And maybe they can see me. Maybe they are energetically present with me. So to really have that moment of saying, I honor you and your past and where it has positioned me. Some folks have a hard time with ancestors because it was not a good relationship that they had. But even there's something for us to learn in terms of breaking generational cycles of trauma and healing. So I think it's just an important time of self-reflection, and your ancestors can help you in that process if you feel called to connect with them, or departed loved ones. They don't even have to be ancestors. The way that I call my ancestors forward is I do put a little level of precaution around it. I say the ancestors who'd like to come forward at the highest levels of love and compassion, because not all ancestors have nice agendas, right? And they're still very flawed humans in some ways. So, I offer that as something folks can do. But overall, I think it's just Scorpio season is a really powerful time of getting to understand yourself, intimacy, and experiencing that connectivity to the other side, to know that materiality is not all that there is. And to maybe, bring in some of these more taboo topics and shed some light on them. So we talk about with Scorpio taboo topics like death, sex, and money. Those things all seem to kind of come out in Halloween, right? With all the sexy costumes and then all the imagery of the deceased. So think about those types of things. And the path of Scorpio energy is transmuting emotional poison. So that may be another intention that folks feel called to.
Wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, they say that they call the path of Scorpio the path of the initiate, and it has these different totems. So it starts out as the Scorpio who's very self-destructive. The scorpion is the only animal in nature that will commit suicide. So when it feels unsafe, it will actually lash out at itself. So it's a dangerous predator. It certainly has a high level of poison, but a lot of times that can be directed to the self as well. So Scorpio's job is to really evolve that instinct, and then they become either, you hear it sometimes as a snake or sometimes as the eagle. They're still predatorial. They're still very dangerous animals. They're carrying that capability of destruction, but they're doing it at a higher, more skillful level where it's not hurting themselves. And then from there, they evolve into the dove of peace or the phoenix. They rise from the ashes. And so it's a really sort of aspirational evolutionary process, and it is Plutonian in nature, of being this like lower level, super toxic animal that then becomes this very beautiful, inspirational harbinger of peace and evolution, and as a phoenix, a new way of being.
Interesting. I've never heard it put quite like that. It's helpful.
I've heard it.
Yeah.
I've heard it from you.
I often say that I do this work for scorpionic energy because it can be so confusing and it's so strong, it's so powerful. If you think about any of the elements we have, right, like your mind, air energy, how you think about a situation is important. Like your material environment is important. Your life force, your energy level is important. But when you're emotionally hurt, when somebody's gone for the jugular, when your heart is broken, there's just nothing more powerful than emotion in this world. So, this scorpionic energy is sustained emotion. And I think it's very aspirational to know that we don't have to live in this toxic, primal, scared, fearful space. We can evolve, and we can become prophets of peace because we have so much compassion and so much understanding of how painful things can be. And I think that's a little bit what you were probably resonating with about Chiron.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah,
Anne.
thank you.
Thank you. I hope that we did some good, and I just send so much love to everyone right now. I just encourage everyone to really, the process of evolution is 1, we get to know ourselves, 2, we master ourselves, and 3, we become our highest selves. And astrology is a tool for that. Our connections with other people are experiential tools for that. And having a level of self-awareness, however you come about it, and detachment from certainty and immediate need for things to feel comfortable or your way, can really help us to create some more space in our life to find new solutions. And we all need to be boldly innovative right now, because there's a lot of things that are not working for humanity, and we need prophets of peace, people of innovation who can bring new things about and really make them materially real. So, let's put our energies there. So rather than focusing on discord, this is how we'll finish. I'm a student of mythology. There's a very famous myth. It's about how the Trojan War began. There's a goddess named Ares, also called Discord. She throws a golden apple. On the golden apple, it says, "To the fairest." She throws that into a group of goddesses. We have Athena and Hera and Aphrodite. They all fight over who is the fairest of them all. They want this golden apple. So if we pose the question, who is the winner in high stakes, zero-sum challenges, there is only one winner, and her name is Discordia. So that's the polarity that I'm interested in. Are we looking at Discordia, or are we looking at Concordia? And how do we worship at the altar of Concordia, of being in peace and harmony?
That's beautiful. And especially for women, it is. I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, if you're really the fairest, you're not going to start the Trojan War, right? Yeah, well, and in alignment with peace, with Concordia, right? The only winner in these situations that are ego-driven is Discordia, right? And we want to avoid that.
And it starts with each of us.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we think it's just a drop in the bucket, what it is that we do in changing our energy or in helping someone else. But those drops add up, and eventually that bucket is full. So you got to start somewhere.
Well, I think we'll wrap this up. Is there anything upcoming that we want to be aware of that you want to share with our audience where we can look for you, see you soon, those sort of things?
Yeah. In November, we are having an astrologers roundtable through 22 teachings. So that's open to the public. Anyone can join us. Just find us online and RSVP. And I look forward to seeing some folks.
Sounds awesome. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Soul Fam podcast. Be sure to tune in to every episode where we dive into a different rabbit hole of the known and unknown to empower you in conscious living and exploration of the greater universe. We hope you leave each episode with a little stardust in your hair and inspiration in your heart. With love from your Soul Fam.